The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
And welcome, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be with us tonight here in the chat room, and those from around the world. We appreciate each and every one of you. If you are listening from somewhere else other than here in the chat room, but you want to come over and join all these wonderful people, go to para-x.com, click on the live chat button, and you'll be put in with all these wonderful people. If you have questions, you can also private chat them to Ceiling Cat, Jeffrey Gould, or myself, Henry Foister, and we will get those questions answered. We got a great guest on tonight, and there's going to be a whole lot of topics, so I'm sure that everybody will be having lots of great questions tonight. Because we do have an awful lot tonight, we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Hello, everyone.
We have Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
And unfortunately, Kat Cloco is not with us. She is in Mexico, Cozumel, or somewhere like that.
Cozumel.
Yeah, where she's going on, I guess, a wedding for her cousin or friend or someone. So I'm not sure who. But she's having a good time, and I'm sure she's a lot warmer than what I am. So, yeah, it's kind of chilly here. Been freezing rain and drizzling and cold. And
today's one of the warmer days we've had in a while, because normally it's been very cold and raining, which we've needed rain big time, so it's not a terrible thing. But yeah, well, the cold doesn't help.
All that's come over this way. But since we do have a great guest, and the topic is very large, and there will be a lot of questions, I'm going to go ahead and let Jeff introduce our guest.
Yes, our guest tonight is author Nick Redfern, whose main area of research, apart from cryptozoology, centers around determining what has been learned about the UFO subject at an official level in Britain. Lecturing on UFO subject both in the UK and abroad, Nick has been interested in UFOs since 1978, and he's spent hundreds of hours at the Public Records Office in London, uncovering thousands of pages of previously classified Royal Air Force, Air Ministry, and Ministry of Defense files on UFOs dating from the Second World War. Nick is the author of many best-selling books on UFOs, including but certainly not limited to 365 Days of UFOs, the FBI Files, the FBI's UFO Top Secrets Exposed, and Cosmic Crashes, the incredible story of the UFOs that fell to Earth, which I'm guessing were impaled by David Bowie. Welcome, Nick Redfern.
Oh, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
You're over here, though, right? You're not in England right now.
Yeah, I moved over here about 17 years ago, something like that. Yeah, and I live just outside Dallas.
Oh, okay. Because I actually was in London for a film shoot some years ago, and the only way I was able to tune into the show was through an app, and it was like 1 a.m. over there.
Yeah, it actually is around about 1 a.m. right now. But yeah, it's. I mean, I like this area. It's sort of a cool area. It's got a nice vibe to it. So yeah, I like Texas.
Cool.
Yeah, it's not bad down there. We got a lot of.
But we have had quite a bit of snow. We had snow last week, and it dropped down to like 19 at one point. So
near Dallas, I didn't know that it get that cold.
Yeah, people that don't realize. I mean, I didn't realize when I first came over, but every year we get snow, and we get a lot of freezing ice, and just today, for example, it dropped down to 22 in the night, so it's pretty cold.
Is it a higher elevation than I realized?
No, it's not so much that. It's just that we just get a lot of cold winds sort of blowing down from north, and really? we get a lot of cold fronts come in, and then, it'll sort of stay around for 3 or 4 days and then pick up for a couple of days. Then we get, we always get the brunt of the cold from up north. So.
Well, the first question that I have is, I assume that you think UFOs are real.
Yeah, I do. What the origin of the phenomenon is, I mean, that's sort of very much kind of open to question. Is it extraterrestrial? Is it sort of interdimensional? Then there's all sorts of more exotic theories like time travelers and all sorts of things. So, yeah, I do believe there is a real UFO phenomenon. The big question is, though, what it is and where it's coming from.
Where it's coming from, yes. Have you ever seen one?
No, I haven't. But, I mean, the reason why I got involved in the subject, when you mentioned in the introduction, sort of around about 1978, when I first got interested in the subject, I mean, I wasn't sort of doing research then. I was just a kid, I just literally got into my teens in 78. So, I wasn't doing research as such, but how and why I got interested in the subject is that my dad was in the British Royal Air Force. He was a radar mechanic. And when I was about 11, 12, 13, something like that, he told me of an experience, or several experiences he had in the early 1950s when he was working on radar. And he was involved in 3 nights of UFO activity where the military radar bases on the east coast of England recorded these strange, high-flying, fast-moving objects approaching from the area of Scandinavia, like Sweden, Norway, Denmark. And the first thought was, well, bearing in mind that this was the height of the Cold War, it's got to be the Russians. But these objects were performing all sorts of strange maneuvers. So fighter pilots from a nearby airbase were scrambled to try and intercept them. And some of the pilots reported seeing these bright lights in the sky. Other of the military personnel reported seeing like what we call classic flying saucers, and this went on for 3 nights. And eventually, everybody was told, you won't talk about this, and what happens here stays here, kind of thing. And my dad didn't tell anybody, as I said, till I was about 12, 13, something like that. And when he told me, that got me interested. And I think actually I was probably closer to 11, I think. And that got me interested, and I started reading books by people like John Keel and Brad Steiger, and that sort of got me interested in the subject, really. And then when I finished school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I wasn't one of the best students, to put it diplomatically, at school. But as luck would have it, I had landed a job on a magazine, an entertainment magazine, and I did all the music stuff. And I got, it was kind of a good job. For about 2 years I did it, and I was sort of getting paid to go and see bands play and do reviews of them, and I enjoyed that because it didn't feel like a real job. And that got me into writing, and then I thought after a few years, why not combine the background that I'd done in journalism for that few years with the interest in sort of paranormal stuff, and sort of investigate, sort of write books on the paranormal, but do it in sort of like an investigative style, So that's sort of what got me into it all, really.
Well, was you in England during the Rendlesham UFO? Oh,
yeah, I was. But I mean, I was when that happened, I was still at school. I was like 13 or something. But certainly, that's when the story broke in 1983. It was sort of 3 years late after it all happened that the story broke. But there's no doubt that, the Rendlesham case is without doubt sort of Britain's Roswell, I guess, not in the sense that it was a UFO crash, because it was a landing,
right,
but in terms of the sort of the scale of it and the importance and the number of people involved, that's how it sort of parallels Roswell, really.
Well, it's interesting because the RAF has had its share of UFO sightings. Even, during the World War II, the American pilots don't seem to have had or reported. I know the RAF had the Foo Fighters.
Yeah, that's right. The Foo Fighters. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Were you going to add something?
Well, it was just that is it that England has more astute and observable pilots, or is it that for some strange reason England has more UFO sightings, or did at the time?
No, I don't think it's that. I mean, there've been a lot of really good pilot reports all around the world, through the Freedom of Information Act over here. A lot of pilot reports have been declassified by the military and various intelligence agencies, and you can find pilot reports from Australia, the US, the UK, Canada, much of South America, Russia, all over the place. So, but there have been some interesting files. You mentioned, the Foo Fighter reports from the Second World War. For people who are listening, the Foo Fighters aren't just a rock band. It's they're also legitimate weird phenomenon. And Dave Grohl, the singer with the Foo Fighters, that's where he got the name from. These strange these strange objects seen in the skies over Europe and the Pacific arena in the Second World War, and they were described as like balls of light, anywhere from the size of like a tennis ball up to like a beach ball, and they seem to be under intelligent control. And the Allies, the Americans, the Brits, the French, etc., they thought they were a secret weapon of the Germans, and the Germans and the Japanese thought they were a secret weapon of us. But nobody really solved the mystery, and they kind of vanished as mysteriously as they first appeared. But whatever they were clearly under intelligent control, because they would zip around military aircraft and sort of pursue them and then fly away at the last second to avoid, collisions. So there was definitely some weird phenomenon going on.
Well, I brought that up because you said that your father was a radar mechanic. And I'm wondering if he observed that phenomenon from a radar standpoint, or did they go under radar?
No, my dad was a radar mechanic, and what happened was the radar operators were picking these weird things up on the screens, and as a radar mechanic, he was brought in to look at the machines, the scopes, etc., to make sure they weren't malfunctioning, or also to make sure that they weren't picking up like false readings of flocks of birds or clouds, that kind of thing. Because sometimes, for example, if you've got like a thundercloud, a highly charged thundercloud, that can actually be picked up on radar, and also a tightly packed flock of birds can be picked up as well. So that's why people like radar operators and mechanics are sort of taught to know the difference between, an aircraft or like a tightly packed flock of birds. And so when my dad was brought in, he checked all the equipment and said, no, everything's working normally. There aren't any problems. So then they realized it wasn't the scopes that were malfunctioning, that they really were picking unidentified targets up.
That's awesome. Because we're getting into this, but say something like the battle over Los Angeles, which I don't know what the radar people were picking up, and maybe you have more information behind why there was that sudden artillery flaring going over Los Angeles at that time.
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't know this, but this was during the Second World War, and we're talking about the early part of the Second World War, and across Los Angeles there was this unusual wave of what we can only call UFO activity. Now, this wasn't, I should stress, sort of in the time when the term even flying saucer or UFO were known. The term flying saucer was created in 1947 following Kenneth Arnold's sightings in June of that year. But as far as UFOs were concerned, it was an unknown phenomenon and factor during the Second World War, except for the fact that people were occasionally seeing weird things like the Foo Fighters. Now, there was this weird invasion, so to speak, of Los Angeles actually there were two waves in 1941 and 1942. And again, radar operators, pilots, and people who were manning ground-to-air artillery weaponry were reporting seeing these strange lights in the sky that were flying extremely slowly at times, almost impossibly slow for aircraft, and they're flying quite high and in the clouds. And it actually caused major panic throughout Los Angeles, to the point where there was the thought was it was like a Japanese invasion, sort of like a precursor to Pearl Harbor. But it actually wasn't. There was no evidence that whatever these brightly lit objects were, they weren't Japanese aircraft. No bombs were dropped, which, if it was some sort of sneak invasion, you would have clearly thought that, there would have been some sort of attack on the city. But there was nothing at all. These objects, which couldn't be seen too well because they were in the clouds and, they were just sort of brightly lit, were trapped, as I said, trapped by radar, seen on the ground by the public, tracked by artillery users, and the phenomenon, whatever it was, appeared and vanished, under very mysterious circumstances. It was never resolved, but extensive files were created on this, and I actually talk about one of the declassified files in the book, which reveals the sort of sheer extent to which these things were seen and how the military was really, in sort of a major panic because they could not figure out what they were. They clearly weren't regular aircraft, and they sort of flew in the face of what the military would normally do. An enemy nation would bomb us, would attack us, but they just sort of flew around and then left, which was kind of baffling. That wasn't what the military was expecting. So everything about the whole situation was kind of weird.
Oh, yeah, I think the only damage was done was the military barrage that was going towards them, because they did fire quite a bit of artillery at them.
Yeah, they did, and that was the weird thing, that nothing was shot out of the sky, that even if anything was hit, which we don't know for sure, nothing came falling to the earth, no damaged aircraft slammed into the ocean or into the city, and yet they were blasting the sky, from 9 p.m. till the early hours of the morning with sort of no success at all.
Yeah.
I guess it was in January the 8th in Stephenville, Texas. There was UFO sightings. They were clear skies, and the object was silent, and it was large, and it was moving fast. Now, there's a lot of them that's accounts where they don't make any noise at all, and then there's some accounts where there's a loud hum. But this particular one, it didn't make any noise. And one of the people that saw it, I guess it was an officer, said the object was a mile long and a half mile wide. That's more like a battleship or something, Yeah,
no, you're right. I mean, I sort of investigated that quite deeply because Stephenville's only about sort of a 45-minute drive from where I live. And the sort of first week, well, the end of the first week, I should say, in January 2008, was when it all kicked off. And people in and around the Stephenville area were seeing this sort of massive UFO. And as you said, we're talking about something like a mile long by half a mile width, flying totally silently, and also flying extremely low at times. And a number of the witnesses said that they saw military aircraft pursuing it, almost like in a dogfight situation. Now, initially, the military denied they had any aircraft in the area, but then, rather weirdly, a week or so later, they said, well, we did have aircraft in the area, but they were just taking part in like a training mission, and they denied any knowledge of the UFO. So a very strange affair, but there were a lot of other reports of UFOs in and around Stephenville at the same time, of smaller UFOs and also some like balls of light, not unlike the Foo Fighters of the Second World War. And it really caught the media's attention, not just locally, but nationally as well. And it sort of really put Stephenville on the map, so to speak. And what was interesting is that the media covered it very seriously because there was this connection with the military, flying aircraft at the time, and people found it very intriguing. And because there were so many witnesses as well, and we're fortunate in the sense that we don't often get that today. Very often UFO reports of just one or two people. This one was sort of, literally dozens of people from Stephenville and across several nights as well. So in that sense, the January 2008 case was a very important one.
Wow. Oh, we got plenty more.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's interesting because people are bringing up in the chat room when you start talking about some of the shapes of UFOs and how varied they can be. And I know that there's like iron shapes ones and circular ones, but cloud. There are some that are obviously not cloud formations because clouds don't form in triangles.
No, well, the triangle ones, they've sort of really been reported more since the 1980s. There have been some sporadic ones before that, but certainly from the early 80s onwards, people started reporting seeing these, what became known as flying triangles. And typically they were sort of, triangular in shape, very large, silent, with 3 lights underneath and then a central light as well. And sometimes they give off this very deep, low humming noise, which a number of people have said that as you got close to them and they could feel this humming noise, actually made them feel quite sick and nauseous. The sort of the beating and thumping and this humming was kind of getting into their chest, and it actually made them sort of feel not well. Now, there have been sort of 2 theories as to what these are. One is that the idea that they're genuine UFOs. The other one, could there be some sort of next generation stealth aircraft? I'd be willing to sort of accept the idea that they could have been secret aircraft. But the thing is, if they were just seen in the 80s, and then the military said, okay, we're going to reveal them now and tell people that yes, this is what you saw, but we weren't telling anybody about this craft because it was still on the secret list, which makes sense. But it doesn't make sense to fly them around from the 1980s to right now and keep it all a secret. There's no reason to. You might as, because the existence of the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber, they were revealed and shown to the public, sort of a decade after they were actually started test flying them. So if the flying triangles are ours and they've been flying for decades, why not just say so? So that leads me to believe that although I'm sure the military is flying around some really sort of exotic and weird stuff, I don't think personally that the flying triangles fall into that category. I think they're genuine UFOs. But where it gets a little bit confusing, the military may well have triangular-shaped craft as well that we don't know about. So I think one of the things we have to remember is that as our technology develops, it's going to become more and more difficult to determine what's a real UFO and what's, one of ours.
We do have the flying wing, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's a smaller plane.
Yeah.
But since the 1980s, have you noticed then a correlation with people who've cited it or abductees that there's a new race of aliens since the 1980s?
I'm not sure that. Well, I wouldn't say there's been a sort of new race of aliens, but certainly as far as the flying triangle reports are concerned, they definitely increased in the 1980s. I mean, there are some reports from the 50s and 60s which are identical. I mean, literally identical to the ones from the 80s and 90s, which suggests they've been around a long time. But the reports back then were nowhere near in the numbers that we've got since the 80s onwards. So I don't think it's a new phenomenon or new entities, so to speak. But what I do think is they've definitely, for whatever reason, these flying triangles have been seen more and more, and they're sort of flying around our skies even more and more in the last sort of 2 to 3 decades.
Wow.
Now you had mentioned the hum and the witnesses feeling kind of nauseous and such like that.
Yeah.
Is it possible it was some sort of an ultra low frequency, not specifically a weapon, but actually somehow generating an ultra low frequency, which is known to cause anxiety and even a fear response in some people?
Oh yeah, I personally, I'm sure that's what it is. Now, whether it's done deliberately to sort of keep people, away, or it's just a byproduct of the technology, I'm not sure. Or maybe it's a bit of both. But yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that over the last, it's the last 30 or 40 years, a lot of research has been done into what's known as acoustic weapons, where sound waves can be used to sort of disable a person. And sort of ultra low frequency waves can actually cause major trouble to a person, like nausea, sickness, drop people to their knees, dizziness, heart palpitations, panic attacks. All of these can be caused by targeted low frequency weaponry. For example, there's a phenomenon called infrasound. Infrasound is an extremely low frequency sound level, which can actually induce, like panic attacks. Yeah.
To carry this point, go ahead.
Go
ahead, Jeff.
I was saying that. Can you hear me? Am I cutting in and out?
Yeah, you're cutting in and out.
Am I falling off?
Yeah, no, you're.
Okay, now you're okay. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say. Yeah, infrasound was the term that didn't come back into my head really fast. But I was discussing that with a friend in a horror show I was, and he works with acoustics, and he was saying that infrasound can even explain why certain houses are maybe considered haunted because people go in, they feel all creepy and freaked out. And I'm like, yeah, but I go into those same buildings, and I'm perfectly fine.
Well, I mean, it's. I guess it depends how different people respond to it. You've got that sort of fight versus flight kind of scenario people talk about. But a lot of people, who are exposed to infrasound in experiments, they feel the heart start to race and they feel panicky and they have sort of mild hyperventilation and before they know it, they're sort of almost in like a full-blown panic attack. Where they need a paper bag or whatever to breathe. And it's all just due to how low sound waves affect the human nervous system. And so I think that could actually come into play with these flying triangles, why people feel that when they see them, they've got to get out of the area quickly because they start to feel so ill and panicky.
Let's take this a step further because I don't know if you're familiar with Dan Aykroyd's confrontation with them, but he was saying that in the town he was living in, that at like 3 a.m, there was a lot of people who felt compelled to go outside. And they were all compelled to go outside. A few of them did, and I guess saw lights. But this brings up a whole nother level of projected mind control, maybe?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly low-frequency sound can control the mind in the sense that, it can prevent you from doing things. It can prevent you from going certain places by directing it, it right at you. I mean, it's been suggested that it may have been used a number of occasions in things like crowd control. And, people start to feel ill when they're demonstrating and things like this. And it's not due to sort of, adrenaline running around the body. It may be due to weaponized low-frequency weapons. So in that sense, it can be used to sort of dissuade people from doing this, which effectively is mind control. It may not be literally altering your mind to where you're sort of in a hypnotic state, but it would control you from the perspective of your mind would start to get panicky and you want to leave the area and, sort of get away. So in that sense, yeah, it does affect the human mind. There's no doubt about that.
Do you think it's also possible that it could be used to, for lack of a better term, wipe somebody's memory of the situation and cause them not to to remember detail?
Well, I mean, some people, when they've been exposed to low-frequency signals and technology, have actually suffered from major short-term memory problems. Now, it always clears up because it's not like they've got Alzheimer's, where it's a progressive thing. It's a temporary thing that sort of scrambled the mind. But people have reported that where their short-term memory after being exposed to low frequencies has been affected for sort of like 5, 6, 7, 10 days, and then it started to go back to normal. But that can be sort of a major issue.
Now,
so sort of like
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Sort of like the Betty and Barney Hill story, where I guess the memory started getting better after hypnosis.
Yeah, sometimes hypnosis brings it back, and sometimes it just comes back to the person. It kind of clears up a little bit. It's kind of like, when you wake up from having a dream and you can't remember the dream, it starts to go out your mind. But then for some point during the day, something triggers a little memory from the dream, that kind of thing, where parts of it can be brought back, even if it's been lost earlier on.
Now, in your book, you have a lot of association with UFOs where different things take place. They see different cryptids. They see, I guess, helicopters that transform. Just all sorts of different things that is associated with it. Do you find that maybe some of these cryptids or different things like that might be coming from another area, from UFOs?
Oh yeah, there's no doubt in my mind, and I think in the book altogether there's like 9 or 10 cases where people have seen UFOs in the same sort of vicinity and time frame as Bigfoot and strange creatures, things like Mothman. For example, I talk in the book about how the Mothman, this strange creature that was seen in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in the between 66 and 67. People who'd seen the Mothman, which was this, for people who aren't aware of it, was this sort of humanoid figure with these large wings and sort of glowing red eyes, very sort of ominous-looking creature. But a lot of the people around Point Pleasant who'd seen the Mothman were visited by the Men in Black, which are sort of a staple part of the UFO subject, but they played a role in relation to this strange creature story. I got another case in the book from Pennsylvania in 1973, where a number of witnesses saw these sort of 7 to 8 foot tall, hairy, humanoid-type creatures, which, we would call Bigfoot, but they also saw UFOs hovering over the fields and the woods where the creature was seen. And there's also a similar creature to Mothman in the UK known as Owlman, which again is like a humanoid creature with wings and glowing red eyes, and people have seen that in association with UFO activity as well. So my personal view on all this is I think a lot of these things could be sort of like multi-dimensional, kind of flitting in and out of our reality, sort of coexisting with us rather than having to come from some faraway star system. Things like quantum physics today are sort of allowing for the existence of extra dimensions to our 3 dimensions, and I think some of these creatures like Bigfoot, like Mothman, might sort of flit in and out of our reality temporarily. That's why we never catch them, because that, for the most part, they're not in our reality. They're in some other reality. But what they can do and what we cannot do is sort of jump from one dimension to another. But somehow they can do it, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a lot the way that the UFOs do. They don't travel, I don't think, for billions of miles. I think it's dimensional levels.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's, if you look at a lot of the UFO phenomenon, there are a lot of cases where a UFO has suddenly appeared out of nowhere, as if it's just jumped into our reality. And if you look at the sheer size of the universe, you could not simply fly from one star system to another. Even at the speed of light, it would still take years. So if they're coming from other dimensions, then that would allow to sort of, for instance, transportation anyway. If they're coming from star systems, who knows how many light years away, then they've got to have found a way to sort of distort time and space so that it takes minutes or seconds. But, there's So, in other words, it has to be a way around regular space flight, sort of point A to point B. They must have found a way to sort of get around all that.
It would make sense because when you look at the various shapes of the UFOs, they don't seem aerodynamically possible. And I know the shape of our rockets are because we do have to escape the atmosphere and the gravity of the Earth. But it seems that these are probably a little bit harder to comprehend how they're jumping from one planet to another.
Yeah, and I think that, again, is sort of a good argument in favour of the idea that they sort of are multi-dimensional creatures rather than extraterrestrial. I mean, by definition, they'd still be alien, but they wouldn't necessarily be alien in the sense that they're coming from another star system. They could be alien in the sense that they coexist in some frequency that's different to ours, and that unless we can tune in or they tune in with us, we don't see them. And I think that could explain why, you think about something in the US like Bigfoot. Bigfoot's typically described as like 8 feet tall. And in a country like the US, with all the technology and the number of people, and we still can't even catch one 8 foot tall ape. It's like stretching credibility to such a point that, we should be able to catch at least one 8 foot tall ape when they're being reported near major cities, but we never do. And now the skeptics would jump on this and say, well, that's because they don't really exist, it's just a myth. But I think it is because they're not here all the time. They're not sort of hiding out in the woods 24/7. They might be in the woods at times, but then when they're not, they're in their own reality, which is very different to ours. And that could explain a lot of phenomena like other types of weird creatures that have been reported, like the Dogman, and possibly even things like lake monsters and ghosts, and paranormal phenomena like the Men in Black, the Black-Eyed Children, and even reports where people have seen things like the Slender Man, which was created for the internet, and yet that seems to have sort of now strolled out of the internet into the real world. So we could be dealing with a lot of weird stuff.
Well, that's the thing. There's the concept of the thought form, with enough people believe in something that it actually gives it some sort of a near corporeal existence.
Well, yeah, that's what I actually think the Slender Man is. There's no doubt that when the Slender Man was created, not that many years ago, it was like it created for the internet. It was this cool, sort of creepy story of this Slender Man type character, like in a black suit and would menace people, and then so many people got caught up by it and, thought the stories were fascinating. People wrote their own stories, and it kind of developed a big following. And then suddenly, like with a click of a finger, people were seeing the Slender Man in the real world. And I'm a big believer in the tulpa phenomenon. And for people who aren't aware of it, the idea of the tulpa is that if you focus your mind on something so intently and you kind of get your mind into an altered state and you focus on this for sort of a couple of weeks or whatever, you can almost create like what's called like a mind monster or a tulpa, where you project outwardly the thing that you're thinking about. And you may not even project it consciously, you may not realize you're doing it, but you're kind of you're sending this imagery out, and when enough people believe in it, it's like giving birth to a mind monster, and then it has some degree of self-awareness and self ability to appear in our world. And I think when people talk about seeing the Slender Man now, they're not imagining it. It's because the extent of people who are fascinated by it and want it to exist, they've willed it into existence, and it's like without our belief in them, they no longer exist. As long as we believe in them, they have a strength to stay around,
Now, what's interesting is the first time I ever heard the term tulpa was from last week's guest. Huh. I'd always heard the term thought form, but I didn't realize it had another term. And when they said tulpa, I'm like, what? And I looked that up while I was on, and I thought, oh, that's the term for it. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, and I mean, I've done this a few times, really. Sort of really got myself into sort of an altered state and tried to focus on something. And on a couple of occasions, I actually think it worked. And, it's not anything that's sort of that only an elite number of people can do. Anyone can do it. It's just a matter of focusing on it. There have been some really good examples occurred when people have been, for example, if they've sort of been in like a DMT or LSD state where their mind, is altered. And psychedelics are actually one of the most sort of profitable ways of sort of inducing a tulpa. And you can find that also in sort of ancient shamanic stories. The shaman in the village, little village in South America, they can get themselves into altered states of minds and then call forth some sort of entity. Now, it may not be that entity is coming through from some other realm of existence. It's coming from the shaman's mind because he or she are in this deeply altered state where they can create this imagery in the mind, and then it literally strides out of the mind into the real world. So there's a big connection between the tulpa and altered states and psychedelics and things like that.
Well, I always like the story of the college class or just bunch of friends who designed a fictional, non-existent person that they started trying to contact on a Ouija board, and they started getting responses.
Oh yeah, that's a perfect example. That's a famous case from the 1970s, and it's almost like be careful what you ask for. You kind of. I mean, a perfect example, but in a comedy situation, if you remember the first Ghostbusters movie, where one of the guys sort of conjures up the puff pastry man as this giant figure, and he conjures it up because the demon says, whatever you think about first is what's going to be your downfall.
Destroyer,
and one of them, Dan Aykroyd, I think, who sort of thinks of the puff pastry man, and that's actually kind of like a jokey version of what the tulpa really is.
Yeah.
Before we take a break, though, we do have a question from chat, and they want to know, since you touched on this subject of having a body, what are your thoughts on the story of Jacko from 1884?
Oh, well, yeah, the Jacko story is an interesting one. For people who don't know, it was reported in a lot of the local newspapers where in the Pacific Northwest, people had seen this smallish ape-like creature that became known as Jacko. Now, it wasn't described as like the typical sort of 7 to 8 foot tall lumbering Bigfoot. It was a smaller animal that, in terms of size, sounds more like a chimpanzee. And people were talking about having seen this, and there were stories about it being sort of like a wild man or a wild boy, or was it an escapee from a zoo or some sort of traveling menagerie? And nobody really knew what Jacko was. Was it some sort of like a juvenile Bigfoot, or was it some sort of, like a wild man, like a primitive human, sort of a surviving relic from the Stone Age or something like that? Or was it some sort of just an unknown ape? Or was it a hoax, a circus escapee? Even to this day, nobody really knows. But the story of Jacko is a really interesting one because, as I said, it was covered by the newspapers, and a number of people saw this being, which, as I said, does actually sound more like a primitive human than it does, like something like Bigfoot or the Yeti. It was definitely sort of more human-like in nature.
I think what we're going to do is go ahead and take a quick break. If you do have questions and you're in the chat room, feel free to private chat them to either Ceiling Cat. I don't see Jeff in the chat room, so apparently he fell off. And or you can send them over to me, Henry Foister, and we will get those questions answered for you. If you are listening from somewhere else and you have questions, you can send a question to theparanormalview@gmail.com. And I believe Barbara is monitoring that, and she will get those questions for us. So, with that, Jeff, are you still on?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, you got back into the chat room, I see.
Yeah, I don't know why it signed me out. It may have been because I had the connection snapping or something.
All right, well, I'm going to let you take us out, and I will bring us back. It'll probably be about 5 minutes or so, 6 minutes, and we will be taking a quick break. So go ahead, Jeff.
You're listening to The Paranormal View on para-x.com with hosts Henry Foister, ceiling cat Barbara Duncan, the absent Cat Cloco, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with tonight's guest, author, cryptozoologist, and ufologist Nick Redfern. So stay tuned for more of The Paranormal View after the break.
You don't have to be a plumber to investigate the paranormal. Everyone is welcome to the Para-X Radio Network. Tune in 7 days a week for great shows and special live events. 24 hours a day, Para-X is the place for paranormal talk. So whether you're a plumber or just another axe-throwing dragon, Para-X is your source for everything paranormal.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be with us tonight. Hope you're enjoying the show. And we have, of course, with us Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
And Barbara Duncan.
I'm still here.
And
we forgot to tell our horror fan Nick that the most horrifying thing about our show is since only Henry hears the audio. We're listening to silence, all of a sudden they're getting this, and we're back at the top of his lungs, and we all jump out of our skin. And
no, Nick, you're back, right?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
No, I told Mick before you got on, Jeff, about the
that doesn't make it any less a jump scare.
Oh, really? Oh, well, I'm not that scary. But speaking of listeners, Barbara, where we got listeners from?
They're all over the place tonight, Henry. We got listeners in Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Austria, and Unknown is back.
The Unknown.
And Costa Rica.
Now, you got, like I said, many, 365 different great stories in the book. But each one has a lot of different stuff in it. There was one that I had down also to talk about, and it's one of the questions that Kat had for us. And it was from March the 5th, 1946, where there was a UFO sighting in Brazil, and this man, I guess, went outside to see what the humming was or what was going on.
Oh, yeah.
And he kind of like got zapped. There's not too many where we know that somebody was killed pretty much by a UFO, but why don't you tell us the story of what happened to this guy?
Yeah, well, this was March the 5th, 1946, which is interesting because it was actually 1 year, or more than 1 year, before the whole flying saucer phenomenon kicked off in the summer of 47. And involved a guy named Joao Prestes Filho. And he was from a small village in Brazil, which I won't try and pronounce because I'm bound to get it wrong. And but he was going home late at night and saw this strange light in the sky. Got back home and looked out the window, and whatever this light was, it basically zapped him with something. We don't really know what it was. But almost immediately he got like sort of a really bad, like feeling like a sunburn, you know, and his skin actually started to bubble as if he'd, you know, got like a major burn. And it actually got even worse than that. His skin started to heat up and bubbled, and his skin started to sort of peel. And as if he was sort of, you know, showing evidence of severe burns. And the locals and his family raced him to the hospital and got him to the hospital. And by the time he got there, his skin was literally sort of, you know, dropping off his body. And by the time they got him in the emergency room, he was sort of close to death by then. And just according to the to the medical personnel who spoke out for the first time in the 70s, he sort of literally just melted in the room. The skin dropped off him until he just died. So what it was, we don't know. What had caused it, but there's no doubt that South America has a lot of quite violent UFO reports where people have been attacked and carried away and been attacked by small creatures. A lot of reports of these sort of small humanoid type entities around South America that acted sort of very aggressively to people. And why South America should have been targeted like that, we don't know, but they do get a lot of reports. But certainly that one is probably a really standout one from an unfortunate perspective from the witnesses' perspective.
Wow. It sounds like radiation, which could have caused burns like that, and because that's what happened over in Hiroshima. The people just had the skin burned off of them, melted kind of.
Yeah, that's kind of what he had, as if he'd been sort of hit by something that was like a targeted type of weapon of some sort, and just sort of, as you say, just like the result of a nuclear attack, that kind of thing. Where it's you have no chance, in a nuclear war, but it was almost like a localized equivalent of that.
Wow. In January the 10th, you had a story about Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It was called Aliens in a Bunker, deep below. I only live about 30 miles from there, you might say.
Oh, cool.
But, I wrote on my paper, it's a kind of a hard one to believe, you might say. This guy supposedly, I guess he was a military personnel at the base. Anyway, I guess some people come up to him, and I don't know if they said anything to him or they just motioned for him to go, but they took him into a hangar and to an elevator shaft, and they took him down and took him in and showed him some aliens. It's hard to believe because I'm not so sure that somebody who doesn't have clearance would just be taken in to be shown things like that.
Well, that's right. I mean, this is one of the things I actually point out, when I was writing this, is that the guy's story was not unlike a number of stories we have where military personnel were sort of guarded, were deep below Wright-Patterson in these alleged bunkers that exist there, where, so the story goes, since the late 40s, they've held a number of dead alien bodies in either like cryogenic preservation or packed in chemicals to prevent them from decaying and rotting away. And a number of people, like guards, have claimed to have seen them, and also doctors brought in supposedly to autopsy them and so on. But this guy's story is a bit different. It reportedly occurred in 1988. And as you say, he was just, an employee at the base, and he was just essentially told to report to one particular area, and met these kind of strange men in black types that actually didn't seem human. They were sort of very pale and skinny, and a very weird situation. And they sort of motioned him into this elevator shaft, which went down for sort of like about 45 seconds to a minute, which would sort of indicate, if the story's true, that it went down, a huge distance. And for some weird reason, they showed him these alien bodies that were sort of preserved in, as I said, like in these chemicals, and he described them as like the classic, alien that people talk about, sort of small with a large head, etc. And then he was taken to the surface and essentially sent on his way, and warned not to talk about it. Now, the story's weird. It's because, why take him down there in the first place and then tell him not to talk about it?
Yeah.
I was half thinking as you were saying, you brought him up, you're like, tell your friends, and then tell them,
well,
don't
actually,
tell
I actually wonder if that was part of the reason. Either it was a point out in the when I wrote about it, I said, either this was some weird loyalty test to see if, by exposing him to like actually faked alien bodies, and then see if he was loyal by monitoring him to see if he then talked about it or didn't, like some sort of strange loyalty test. Or the other possibility is that they may have known that there's no way he could have kept quiet, and maybe there are people on the inside that want the story to come out, and so they subtly, reveal these little teasing type stories as a means to sort of get us used to it bit by bit. But there's no, if you read this, if you've read the story, there's no logical reason why he should have been exposed. He wasn't like he was a medical doctor who could have studied the bodies, or a scientist, He was just literally taken out of his regular job and said, hey, come with us, and don't talk about what we just showed you, So as I point out, it doesn't make sense. But the fact that it doesn't make sense makes me ironically think he wasn't hoaxing it, because a hoaxer would come up with a more sort of coherent story, So I think it probably was some sort of either a loyalty test or somebody wanting to get the story out to see what the public reaction might be to the idea that there are dead aliens under Wright Patterson, and just bit by bit acclimatise us to accepting that this is really going on and they really do have those bodies there.
Yeah, aside from the fact that they're in chemicals, the only other plausible explanation is they were trying to expose him to something.
Yeah,
I mean from like a viral or...
Well, it could be. I mean, I think that the best I can say about that story, because it is so weird, is that whatever the motivation, there was some weird mind games going on where they were testing him for something somehow or other, I
don't know if you saw the film Arrival with Amy Adams and Jeremy Kramer that was out recently. No. Brilliant movie. But at one point, as they go to confront the aliens, somebody's being brought out in a medevac tube, and Amy says, "Who was that being medically evacuated?" He says, "Some people can't quite handle this as well as others."
Oh. Well, again, maybe that's one of the reasons, is to see how, put people in a situation where they're exposed to aliens and see how their response is, Is somebody going to be amazed and drop to their knees? Is somebody going to have a heart attack and drop dead? Are they going to go into a psychotic state, or are they going to think it's amazing? It could actually be to see how people respond, and then that might give a good indication as to how the general public as a whole would respond. And I think there would be various different reactions. If it was somebody said tomorrow, revealed and said, hey, we know what UFOs are, and we've got bodies of dead aliens, and we know where they're from and what they're doing. You probably would get sort of multiple different responses from different people. Somebody would want to know what's going on. Somebody would be hiding under the couch. It'd be a bit of everything, really. So
that's what fascinates me, that people would be averted to it now. I mean, in this time, because one of the famous things about H.P. Lovecraft stories back in the 1920s is that when certain dark secrets of reality were revealed, characters would almost immediately lose their minds, and they would go into psychotic snaps and just be institutionalized, usually at the end of the story. And I was like, I can't imagine that happening today, but I can see, I guess, some people's, if their worldview is so thrown away, sort of like everything is wrong, they might not be able to handle it. I'd be like, that's so cool. And others, I guess, would, like you say, fall down and, curl up in a ball.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know because, most of our, apart from the UFO subjects, our sort of exposure to aliens comes via sci-fi movies, or books or novels, whatever. But, it's one thing, I guess, to sort of read about it and watch an entertaining movie. But on the other hand, if you're exposed to the reality of it, you might find yourself in a really different state. It's kind of like watching the latest news from, say, for example, there's a war going on somewhere and, you're watching it on CNN. But then imagine if you're thrust into the middle of that war and you're fighting the enemy and dodging bullets. it would be very different. And I think it could be the same with the UFO subject. It's one thing to watch a movie, but if, again, like on CNN or something, there's this sudden announcement that the government's going to reveal something about UFOs, and then it all comes tumbling out, and maybe it's not all going to be good news, and then, people could well be in shock. So I think there could be something to this idea of testing people now and again to see what the response is. And, because we're all human, you can get a good idea of, if you pick 10 or 15 military people and expose them to the phenomenon, out of that 15, there's probably going to be varying different, responses. And that would help, hopefully, sort of give them a good idea as to how the rest of us would react. So I think there was there was definitely like a psychological game going on with this guy, because, as I said, there was no real reason for him to be involved in it, really.
Well, we got a question from the chat room. Nyla wants to know why we don't ask them if they can cure cancer, and if so, why won't they please eradicate it from this planet?
It's already been cured. The FDA is in the pocket of big pharma. It's been suppressed for years.
Well, I think, whatever these entities are, whether, like I said before, whether extraterrestrial or interdimensional, what they are, they don't seem to get involved with us directly. They're also always sort of skulking around in the dead of night and abducting people, and they stay very much in the background. We haven't had that sort of landing, on the White House lawn or outside Buckingham Palace or outside the Kremlin or whatever, That hasn't happened. And the entities behind the phenomenon don't seem to want to show themselves. But your person in the chat room is right. We haven't had aliens come down and cure cancer, or save the rainforests, or find cures for this or that, or find the answer to sort of overpopulation, or things like this. And I think what it demonstrates is that, obviously we haven't been destroyed, so they're not sort of totally dangerous as far as we can tell, but equally they haven't done that much to help us as far as we can tell. So maybe they're just like us, that they're self-serving, that whatever their purpose is on our planet, it's to serve their purposes. And the fact that, it's kind of like our ego, if aliens are coming here, people think, oh, well, it's got to be to see the great human race, It may not be. It may be that their reason for being here obviously is connected with us, but to try and, influence us, who knows? Maybe that's not part of that agenda. Maybe we're not seeing the full story. Maybe there's a bigger picture that we just don't understand yet. But no, the person who asked the question is correct, that they haven't done a great deal, to sort of, get rid of the things that really affect us, like illness and disease and, all the problems on the planet. It's like they're very much detached and just watching it,
Yeah, I think they're here mainly to mine for the ore and other things that we have on this planet that they probably need for things. So. Yeah,
well, maybe we're like people talk about cattle mutilations and abductions and things like DNA and eggs being taken. Maybe we're just a commodity to them, in the same way that a cow is a commodity for the farmer and the meat industry,
Well, also, if we look back at history, and there's surges in culture. The Greek culture, for example, the Renaissance period, and we're kind of in now a scientific era of breakthroughs. Is it possible that they're intervening, but very, very subtly?
Well, they could be. There's no doubt that throughout history there have been sort of sudden, not just spurts in technology, but certain people who've sort of changed the world in many ways. Scientists who've suddenly come up with a particular idea. particularly technology, that kind of thing. And but I mean, in saying that, I mean, if you look at the world now, it's in probably the most dangerous state it's been in for a long time. Since the Cold War, the Russians and the Chinese and North Korea, and it's all coming together at once. And I don't see any increase in UFO activity trying to stop it.
Sure.
I mean, so certainly there could have been some degree of influencing people in different directions, and certainly some people, well, actually many people who've had profound UFO encounters, their lives have been changed, where they've gone down a new path, and they feel sort of energized, and that they've been open to a new and important world. So that does happen. But also, it's almost as if, as much as they do that they also have this detached angle, where they kind of stay in the background as well.
Wow. Well, I think what we're going to do is go ahead and take our last break. Well, we got a break because I got tons more stuff we need to talk about. And Jeff, guess who gets to take us back out?
Yeah, this will teach Kat for being away. You're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with hosts Henry Foister, Ceiling Cat Barbara Duncan, and hooky playing Cat Cloco, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with tonight's awesome guest, prolific author, cryptozoologist, and ufologist Nick Redfern. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be with us. We got a full chat room tonight, and those listening from around the world, we appreciate each and every one of you. Tonight, we have our guest with us, Nick Redfern.
Oh, yeah. I thought you were going to say something else.
And we have Barbara Duncan with us. And
yep, still unabducted.
And Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
We have, Kat's still got a couple other questions here, and I wanted to try and get those in along with the other 5,000 that I've got. And I'm sure Barbara's got 2 or 3 pages also.
At least.
Yeah, at least. She was talking about the one for June 26, 1945. Crop circles as Nazi spy signals. This is an interesting twist on crop circles and why they persisted. Are crop circles still reported today?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, this is an interesting one that a lot of people won't know about. The whole issue of crop circles and the military. There have been rumours over the years about sort of secret investigations into crop circles by government agents and agencies as well. And this has been sort of confirmed to a degree because through the British Freedom of Information Act, a number of files have been released from the Second World War by Britain's MI5, and MI5 is the British equivalent of the FBI, and then there's MI6, which is the equivalent of the CIA. But these files from MI5 from the Second World War talk about how military pilots, like, for example, British and American pilots, flying over Europe to bomb Germany during the Second World War, reported seeing that as they were flying over the fields of, like, France and Holland and places like that, they saw these large formations in the fields, sort of classic crop circles, as we would call them today. And the first thought was, well, because this was, a few years before the whole UFO phenomenon kicked off, the first thought was, well, are they sort of like coded messages for Nazi pilots? This one intricate formation means, sort of approach London from the southwest at midnight and bomb, etc., etc. And which kind of makes sense, that they would think something like that. But then when MI5 debriefed various captured German military personnel who'd been shot down and survived, and they interrogated them, the German pilots admitted that they'd seen these weird formations and thought they were sort of coded messages for American and British pilots to how to bomb and attack Germany. And what it basically came down to was that MI5 were unable to explain at all who had created these massive formations in the fields. But files were open, and for about 16 months, 17 months, I think it was, MI5 put together a number of files and photographs, which you can now see at the National Archives just outside of London. You can go and review the original files. And they actually sent agents out all across the country to photograph these formations. And what's important, there's actually two things. One is the fact that the military and the intelligence community was taking an interest in these formations. And the other thing, of course, is the fact that this was back in the 40s, long before the term crop circle was created, and long before the sort of the modern interest in the subject. This shows it's actually not a new phenomenon, and it's also one that the military intelligence was taking a deep interest and even a concern in, way back sort of 70 years or thereabouts.
Wow. Barbara, you got one?
Well, it goes back to the crop circles, which is, okay, has anybody made any leeway in the deciphering of them? Because I guess late last year there was a fairly complicated one coming out, but all seem to have the same type of symbology to them.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of crop circles, the original crop circles were simply circles. That's why they became known as crop circles, and that was sort of in the mid-80s. But definitely from the early 90s onwards, and the phenomenon sort of really changed to where people were seeing these massive formations, literally hundreds of feet in length. And I started going down the crop circles every year, sort of from about 92, 93 onwards until probably at 99, something like that. I go down every year and sort of spend a few days and check the formations out. And, when you're standing in these things, it's only then you realize how massive they are. And then when you sort of think, they've appeared overnight in pitch black darkness and they're sort of geometrically sort of correct and, huge in scale, then you realize that this is sort of, an amazing phenomenon. And in many cases, the formations have been shown to sort of have connections, in some cases, with sort of apocalyptic scenarios, others where they've sort of been tied in with sort of alien messages and things like this, and even things like, for example, there's some cases where the formations have mirrored sort of ancient sort of artwork from ancient Egypt and South America, things like this. And there's varying different theories that it's extraterrestrials doing this. One of the more interesting theories, which I find kind of interesting, is the Gaia theory, the idea that the Earth itself is like a living, spiritual, self-aware entity, the planet itself, and that with all the damage we do to the planet, it's like the planet, it responds by creating these messages. And people aren't aware of it. As I said, it's the Gaia scenario, Gaia, the idea that the planet is a living entity and reacts. It kind of like in the same way, if you get an illness or a disease, your body fights against it. And maybe it's like a similar thing that the crop circles are an offshoot of, or a response to the damage that the good old human race is very good at doing,
And it's interesting now that the scientific analysis of these crop circles is getting better. Before in the 1940s, of course, they couldn't really analyze them now. But what's coming out of the true crop circles anyway it's amazing how those plants are getting bent.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the interesting things is that people assume that when the crop circles are made and, the ground's flattened, that the corn is snapped. It actually isn't. What generally happens is that most of the crop circles are sort of found sort of June, July, August period, and mainly in the English county of Wiltshire. Now, the farmers, obviously, they're in the business of sort of reaping the corn. They've got to sell it for their, for their business, for their livelihood. But if the fields aren't reaped of the corn, a lot of people don't realize that corn, even though it's laid down flat, continues to grow. It grows horizontally instead of vertically. In other words, it's actually been laid down quite softly and carefully and not actually snapped, which is an interesting scenario. Now, in terms of, you just mentioned about the sort of effects and so on, a number of people who've been in crop circles have felt sort of like immediately sort of rejuvenated. People have been in there who've suffered from things like migraines, or people who've had, anxiety and things like that have felt sort of like a positive energy while they're in the formations. And a number of animals, like dogs, for example, particularly, have reacted when they're in the circles as if they're picking up some sort of energy as well. So, there's a lot surrounding crop circles that we still don't really understand and how and why it works, but clearly something is being experienced.
Well, it's a very good theory that it's the earth healing itself. The way our own bodies heal, sometimes we then develop blisters and boils, but that's actually materials and harmful things leaving our body. And you get all that white blood cells along with it, which of course is healing. So maybe that's not too far from the truth.
Yeah, it's kind of like, the idea that the crop circles are almost like the Earth's equivalent of an antibiotic. It's a way of trying to, but instead of healing the planet itself, it gives the message to us that, we've got to do it. We've got to sort of learn, otherwise we'll never learn.
Well, they've discovered with trees, they do communicate with each other, and when a tree falls or a tree's ill, they actually use a network to take sugar and transport it to the diseased tree.
Yeah,
so,
and plants as well. Plants will respond, to music and things like this. And I think we often assume that because, we may be the most intelligent species on the planet, but we're not necessarily, the most. I won't say, there's a lot of flaws in us. We're very good at inventing things that are really good, but equally we're very good at inventing things that could wipe us out, and we kind of hover on that angle all the time. But I think sometimes we don't give other life forms the sort of the due that they deserve. I mean, if you look at, for example, a spider, a spider can spin this incredible web. No human on the planet could do that, and yet a spider can. You have animals like electric eels, which literally electrocute their prey. Something that sort of totally baffles us. Or you have like a bat, which has its own. It's not radar, but a bat can sort of has like a similar situation to radar, where it can sort of bounce, the wave back and forth and sort of fly in darkness and avoid walls and things like that. So, there's a lot of evidence that sort of animals and, plants and react in a way that's far exceeds what we can do in many respects,
Wow.
not to mention the bumblebee, which shouldn't fly but does.
Oh, yeah. Small wings, big body.
Well, I can't remember which scientist said it, that he didn't believe that there were alien life forms because any advanced civilization that developed the means to destroy themselves would.
Well, there is that aspect to it. As I said earlier, unfortunately, for all our technology and our brilliance and what we can do, we're always fighting, and I said, you have to look at the world now. I mean, everybody's at everybody else's throats. I mean, it's one thing to sort of, have an argument with a little country here and there, but when, it's sort of major nations of the world are all arguing with the Russians and the Chinese and now the North Koreans, and everybody's talking about war, well, I think what the big danger today is that there are certain people who won't name who actually think they can win a third world war, which is impossible. It's impossible for any major nation on this planet to win a nuclear war. Everybody will lose if it ever comes to that. It's 100% impossible to win.
Yeah, that's true. And I don't know why they even think that on that aspect of let's go to war and we'll annihilate them, but actually they're killing themselves too. So,
well, my favorite.
It's like the fact that people have pointed out, well, we've got more nukes than the Chinese and the Russians. Well, it doesn't matter, because the sheer size of the nukes today, you don't need, just because we might have 6,000 and the Russians have got 2,000, well, you could wipe out an entire nation with like 50. It would irradiate the sheer scale of them. It would irradiate the entire country. It would destroy all the major cities. You don't need to fire the entire arsenal to just obliterate the enemy, and it would just,
and it kills everything.
Shattered.
Yeah, it kills everything for years. You can't, before you can live
I mean,
there.
Would be,
so.
Yeah, I mean, people, if you look at some of the estimates, they're talking about, immediately sort of 60% of the world's population dead just from the nuclear exchange, and then out of that 60%, the remaining 40%, probably most of those would die within weeks of radiation poisoning, and the world's population within a year would go from like 7 billion to maybe like 2 million.
Yeah.
And it would the planet would be shattered for like 50,000 years or something.
Yep, take it a long time. So.
Oh yeah. And on that jolly note,
on January 25th, 1968, in Gallipolis, Ohio, you had it says a secret is revealed, and it's where this woman's father, I guess, had died, but he had told her this story before he died, and she couldn't reveal it till after his death. It was where he was working at NORAD, and they showed him, or he got to see pictures of alien bodies around the spaceship, and that was from New Mexico, from Roswell, I guess.
Yeah, this is kind of a little bit like, the guy who went into the bunker at Wright-Patterson, except for one major thing, that his exposure to these photographs rather than bodies was actually part of his work in NORAD. And he talked about in the 1960s, he'd seen these photographs, black and white photographs, aerial photographs of these strange bodies sort of strewn around the desert floor. Now, according to the story, excuse me, and the lady that I spoke to, and this was her father who had this experience, this was somewhere in New Mexico in 1947. Now, that sort of instantly suggests the Roswell crash, which occurred in New Mexico in July 47. But the source of the story never mentioned Roswell by name. And that actually adds some weight to the story, because a lot of people don't realize that although the Roswell case is called the Roswell, incident or whatever, but where the crash actually occurred on the Foster Ranch in Lincoln County is actually about a 2-hour drive from the town of Roswell, or the city of Roswell. The only reason it's associated with Roswell is because that's where the local military base was based from, that went out to pick up the wreckage and see what had happened. But the town of Roswell, as I said, is about 120 miles from the crash site.
Right.
But he talked about seeing these photographs, which clearly it seems to be photographs where some sort of, like a small military plane had overflown the area, and they'd had sort of expert photographers take pictures of the area, so they could get all the different angles, etc. And he didn't see, apparently, any close-up pictures, of the bodies or autopsy photographs. They were pictures taken as, some sort of aircraft had clearly flown over the crash site. And they were reportedly seen at NORAD, which the North American Air Defense Command in Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado. That's where the guy worked. And basically, stayed silent for years until he revealed the story. That at least to the extent that he knew the story, you know.
Wow.
Okay, we're running out of time, but before we do, I really want to get to this, and that is, we talked about tulpas earlier, and you bring it up in your book, 365 Days of UFOs, and that is black-eyed children.
Yes.
And their reference to UFOs. And here's a question: are they tulpas, or is it possible there's some sort of human alien gray hybrid?
Well, I mean, some people have suggested that the black-eyed children are tulpas, and they could be, but personally I think they're something else. Now, whether they're sort of human hybrids or extraterrestrials sort of created or designed to look like us, I mean, it's sort of hard to say. But I mean, if you look at the reports, it's a sort of relatively new phenomenon, going back to the latter part of the 1990s, but even then it wasn't talked about that much. It's really only been sort of the mid-2000s that it's majorly taken off. And a good friend of mine, David Weatherly, David wrote sort of a definitive book on the subject called The Black-Eyed Children, which I did the introduction for. And the black-eyed children phenomenon is actually not unlike the Men in Black, where they typically sort of knock on people's doors late at night and try and find a way into the home. And they never sort of force their way in. They find all ways possible to be invited in. And this kind of parallels the old folklores about vampires, you know, when the first time they come to a person's home, they have to be invited in. You know, they can't pass the threshold themselves unless you let them. So, you know, you have that sort of paranormal parallel as well. And the black-eyed children are very much like the Men in Black, whereas both of them are sort of that very pale skin, and they look odd and they act strange, and they come out at night and they try and find ways in the home. And in the same way that the Men in Black are dressed in black and they have these black fedora hats, the black-eyed children are very often dressed in black hoodies, you know, and they pull these hoodies down over the face, and when they're talking to people on the front doorstep, they usually typically have their head pointed down, and so people can't see the face properly. And there's a very good reason for that, because their eyes are sort of totally black. And of course, when people see them and they see that the entire eye is just black, you know, there's nothing other than black there, they totally freak out and slam the door on them. But there have been some cases where the person didn't slam the door, and they felt as if the black-eyed children could sort of control their minds and try and force them to let them in the house. And the people had to sort of really sort of work hard to break the spell, or this sort of hypnotic spell that they'd been placed into. So, you know, there's a lot of theories have been put forward for the black-eyed children that, you know, could they be aliens created, you know, to look like as closely to us as possible, or were they alien human hybrids? One of the most sort of popular theories amongst the people that research this is that they actually don't have a UFO connection, because ironically there actually really aren't any reports where people had seen the black-eyed children in conjunction to UFOs. That's just sort of an assumption that many people have. But the most popular theory among a lot of the people that research this is that there's some sort of paranormal or possibly even demonic phenomenon that, you know, they're sort of highly dangerous, you know, almost sort of occult-based, if you like.
Which sort of, I mean, I'm sort of on the fence with, at least with the MIBs, because there's so many different kinds. You know, There's the normal, what we would consider governmental MIBs, and then there's the tall, slender MIBs. And
right, yeah.
I don't know if there's WIBs too, Women in Black.
I actually wrote a book last year called Women in Black, which is all about the women in black, which are actually quite like the Men in Black, yeah. They're sort of sinister and strange looking. But you're right, where it gets confusing is that there are the normal Men in Black, which seem to be sort of government people, but then you have these weirder ones, which are sort of very pale and skinny and wear these wraparound glasses, and which people have said seem to hide these large bulging eyes. And So there seems to be our Men in Black that may actually be sort of, disguising themselves as the weirder Men in Black just to cover their tracks, so to speak. So there's sort of definitely at least two categories of Men in Black, but the Women in Black are very similar. They threaten people about UFO encounters, don't talk about this, but they don't look entirely human. They kind of look like they almost like vampires. They're sort of pale and skinny and gaunt and just menace people, really.
Now, is this a relatively new phenomenon?
No, it's actually not. I mean, that was one of the interesting things I found when I was doing the research, is that what I think has happened is that because the term Men in Black is sort of so well known, it's almost become like iconic, but a lot of people aren't aware of the Women in Black cases, and they've just been sort of written off or forgotten, or the importance of them hasn't been recognised. But I've got the book I wrote last year, Women in Black, is like 300 pages long, because that's how many cases, I actually uncovered. And, they kind of come like a cross between secret agents and, a goth girl. That's the best way I can describe them. And, they're seen all around the world, and it's clearly, to me at least, it's connected to the weirder Men in Black, and I think the black-eyed children are all interconnected with the Men in Black, the Women in Black, black-eyed children. You have these things like the Shadow People and the Hat Man, and I think they're all connected somehow as well. So.
Wow.
But not so much as alien, or do you think that they're more interdimensional beings?
I think they're more interdimensional, because a lot of weird aspects going on that kind of take it far beyond the whole just nuts and bolts aliens, where I'll give you a couple of examples, and I talk about this in the book as well. There's cases where people have been visited by the Men in Black, the Women in Black, black-eyed children, and they've fallen sick immediately after the events occurred, almost as if they've been sort of like supernaturally infected. And I've got other cases where the witnesses, after the Men in Black or the Women in Black had left, they experienced violent poltergeist activity in the home, which to me, is sort of more of a indicative of like a paranormal phenomenon than, a nuts and bolts alien phenomenon. So there's sort of a lot of things to think about when it comes to these phenomena that, make me think we're dealing with something that's sort of more paranormal and dimensional rather than, scientists from some other world or whatever.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because my understanding, at least from people I've talked to, the Hat Men with the glowing red eyes, etc., tend to show up when people are going through major crises anyway, or they herald that crisis. So it's almost as if, well, they might be the cause of it too, but the physical reaction, are you seeing that it's a viral thing, or is it mostly just like, again, you were talking about the sound creating nausea, etc.?
Well, I mean, it's interesting when you say about, people seeing things like the Shadow People and the Hat Man, when there's trauma in their lives and things like that. One of the interesting theories, and quite a disturbing theory, is that they target people who are suffering from stress and anxiety and, major problems. And the reason they do it, the theory goes, is that they actually sort of feed on human energy. And the more sort of negative energy that we create in our minds or in our bodies, that they kind of feed on it like a parasite. In other words, they sort of use us and drain us of energy. And there's actually some evidence of that. For example, there are a lot of MIB and WIB cases where the Men in Black or the Women in Black have been in a person's home and they've been threatened not to talk about this UFO case or this case or whatever. And suddenly they've started to feel sort of weak and tired and faint and lightheaded. And one witness described it as how like a diabetic must feel if they start to crash, when they've missed 2 meals or something. They get the shakes and they feel weak, and they've got to eat like right now. And there are a lot of cases like that where the witnesses felt like that, as if the men in black and the women in black were literally feeding on their life force. So in other words, the more stressed out and fearful a state they can get you into, the bigger chance they can then bleed that negative energy dry, and sort of, it's almost like we're the cattle to them, which is a disturbing scenario, but when you look at the cases, it actually makes quite a deal of sense, really.
Well, we do taste delicious, so...
Yeah. You also just described what a lot of people would say about demonic activity, which is it tends to drain people of energy, households of energy.
Well, yeah, and I do think with some of these UFO cases, or not necessarily where there's direct UFO sighting, but where these sort of creepy things crop up, like the Hat Man, I do think there is a definite sort of connection between that phenomenon, sort of paranormal phenomenon, that, there are a number of UFO cases where there are paranormal aspects to them as well. So, the whole UFO phenomenon, I think, is far more complex than we kind of realize. It's not just nuts and bolts aliens. People who've seen UFOs have weird synchronicities, or sometimes they gain the gift of like prophecy. Things that if they were just, somebody else's equivalent of NASA, you wouldn't get that. So I think there's far more to this than just nuts and bolts aliens. There's a, sort of like a spiritual / supernatural aspect to it all as well.
We have a great question for that in chat, and that they want to know if you've ever encountered somebody who's encountered a black-eyed child and had interactions with them, and what the results of it were.
Oh, yeah, I know. I've interviewed a number of people who've seen the black-eyed children. One of them, a friend of mine, Christina George, whose story is in my Women in Black book. And Christina told me this really sort of creepy story about how she saw these two black-eyed children with a black-eyed woman on her property. And it was a very weird situation where she kind of, felt very uneasy about it. And Christina does a lot of research into paranormal phenomena, and it was at the height of an investigation that these three entities, the two children, one a boy and one a girl, and the woman, appeared on her property. And she saw them sort of staring at her, and they were chanting on the front yard, which was like really creepy and weird. And then they suddenly vanished. And she got Christina got a really unsettling vibe from all this. And that's just one of many where nearly all the witnesses I've spoken to, they just get this weird vibe. It's kind of that situation where you meet somebody for the first time, you've never met them before, you don't know anything about them, but you kind of just get that weird feeling that there's something about the person why you don't like them. We've all experienced that. Oh. But it's like, imagine that sort of multiplied 100 times, and people get that feeling from from these black-eyed kids. It's just something you just want to get away from them,
So she just describe how they disappeared? Was it like, boink, they're gone, or they like disappeared like Star Trek teleporter? Or,
No, they were literally there 1 second and gone the next. And the weird thing was that Christina asked all the other people, because this was a Saturday, this was like a Saturday afternoon, it wasn't like, the dead of night, and she asked the people in the street, which is like a little quiet street, but, people were out, sort of mowing the grass or whatever, or just hanging out. Nobody else saw them except for her and her flatmate. Oh. And even he had a degree where it seems like his mind had been taken over, and he sort of just went into the house almost with a vacant sense, just wandered off and left Christina to deal with it. And it was a really strange scenario.
So if she was the one seeing them disappear, it makes me wonder whether or not she actually saw them disappear, or like you say, if there was a little bit of mind control involved, did they sort of put her in a fugue state brief enough for them to just walk away? And when she came out of it, it was, boink.
Yeah, I mean, but whatever the situation was, she was absolutely adamant that as she looked at them, and the weird thing was, as she looked at them, they suddenly turned in unison as if they realized she was looking at them. And then it was when she caught sight of them and just saw that all three had got these sort of just solid black eyes. And this was just about, I think it was either 2012 or 2013. I'd have to check, but it was just a couple of years ago. It wasn't long ago at all.
Yeah, wow. That's the first I've heard of an adult.
Yeah.
Do you think you don't actually get many?
Yeah. Do people who encounter black-eyed children have more than one encounter?
That's actually a really good question, because for the most part they don't. But that's also the same with the Men in Black, that usually they turn up once. The black-eyed children turn up once and try and find a way into the house, and if they don't manage to do that, which usually they don't, they're gone and people don't see them again. But as I said, there are sometimes like sort of residual effects. Like, for example, I know of some cases where people have seen the black-eyed children, and they've had things like microwaves blow or refrigerator, things like that. With the sort of household electrical equipment stops working. Excuse me. As if, again, some sort of energy has been left behind that's had an effect, as I said, on things like freezers, refrigerators, microwaves, lights, that kind of thing.
Our time has just run right on by. You got about 4 minutes before we start wrapping up. I'd like for you to talk just a little bit about the ET that is in the Pentagon by the name of Val Thor.
Well, yeah, this is an interesting story. It goes back to the 1950s, and a guy named Frank Stranges. Frank Stranges wrote a book called Stranger at the Pentagon. And Frank Stranges was sort of a typical kind of contactee, as they became known in the 50s, people who claimed contact with very human-looking aliens, who wanted us to sort of lay down our nuclear weapons and all live together. And throughout the 50s, the whole contactee movement was massive. I mean, some of the conventions that George Van Tassel, another contactee, had in the 50s, his conventions out at Giant Rock in California in the 50s, they attracted audiences of like 14,000, which is sort of, far beyond what you get at conferences today, which is usually a few hundred. So that shows the extent, the interest in the phenomenon. But Frank Stranges said that he met this very human-looking alien named Valiant Thor, who had sort of infiltrated the Pentagon. And when I say infiltrated, I don't mean in a sinister sense, but supposedly, because it looked so very human-like, had found a way into the Pentagon, as had some of his colleagues, as a means to try and influence the governments on to sort of, getting on a path which would steer us away from nuclear war. And although it's very controversial, a number of people, including retired military people, have come forward to say that, the aliens that are visiting here aren't just sort of little small entities with the big heads and the black eyes, but some of them, could literally pass for us. And one of them was this character Valiant Thor that I talk about in the book, who reportedly had, sort of achieved a degree of high influence in the Pentagon with generals and different people, and was supposedly trying to mold us on a particular direction to ensure that we didn't sort of all destroy each other or whatever. But the interesting thing about Valiant Thor is that a number of people have claimed to have seen him in more recent years and said that he looks exactly the same, as if he hadn't sort of aged. They all estimated back in the 50s and even in the 2000s that he looked about 35 and had not changed. So, that's sort of an interesting aspect of the story as well.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Very interesting book. There's 365 days a year with UFOs, so and each one has quite a bit of information talking about each day. So, we would like to see about having you back on later this year sometime and talk a whole lot more about all your different books and the stuff. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I'll be pleased.
We haven't even got it.
Yeah.
We haven't even got into alien abductions yet.
No.
That's right.
There's a couple I want to talk about, like Dulce, an underground base, and all that stuff. So we got tons more to talk about. But what we want you to do is we appreciate you being on, and we want you to give out all your information where people can get your books, your websites, how to contact, and all that good stuff. And then we want you to stay on until after we're off, and we'll talk with you for a minute.
Okay, cool. Well, the new book, the one we've been talking about tonight, is 365 Days of UFOs. It just came out last week, so it's literally a brand new book. And people can get it off Amazon, or they can also order it from their local bookstore as well. And if people want to contact me, I have a blog. If you just type in Nick Redfern, World of Whatever, that'll give you the link to the blog. And there's also a contact section at the blog where people can click on and reach me. And always, pleased to chat with people. I'm not one of these, authors who sort of, I'm an author, don't talk to me. I'm always happy to chat with people. And if they want to sort of share stories, or if they've had experiences and they're looking for answers, and they've got any questions, I'm always sort of happy to answer questions. And because I think we're all in it kind of together. That's the way I look at it. We're all sort of looking for answers, whether it's, it's like you with your show, or me writing the books, or a witness sharing the story. We're all part of, looking for the answers, and I think that's important. I don't have much time for all the kind of egos in ufology, you know what I mean? It's like, we're all in it together. That's the way I kind of look at it.
That's a bad thing. I think some people take that way too far.
I mean, I see that at conferences sometimes, demanding this and demanding that, and they want first-class flights, and I'm like, dude, it's a 2-hour flight, don't sort of make the conference organizer give you a first-class flight. You don't need it,
Wow. Well,
ridiculous.
Just remember to take all the brown M&Ms out of your green room.
Yeah. I shall have to remember that one.
Well, Jeff, you back?
Yes. Yep. Let's see if I can hang on a few more minutes.
We'll give out all our stuff in.
Yep. Well, you can go to my website at jeffgould.net, GEOFF.GOULD.net/2011PNV.htm. That's my Paranormal View hub page, where you can access previous shows, reports, and guests' websites and book links, etc., as well as previous show archive podcasts. The show's official website is theparanormalview.com. We're at facebook.com/theparanormalview, all one word. Make sure to set your settings for the show's updates and weirdness articles get posted during the week. You're welcome to follow me at Real Badger on both Twitter and Instagram. Also, as of recently, previous show archive podcasts are available on iTunes. Plus, we're starting to post them on YouTube, so they're going to be embedded on the report pages as well. You can follow the Paranormal View on Twitter at ParaView Radio. And as I say, the report of tonight's show will have, as like all of Nick's books are going to be listed on. You can link right to Amazon and buy your books. Believe me, yeah.
Very good. You can go to theparanormalview.com, and we have all of our links listed on there. All of our websites, how to get a hold of each one of us, including Barbara and Kat. Yes. So tonight's show, we went by real fast, and again, I want to thank Nick Redfern for taking the time to be with us. Even though it was 2 hours, it went by way too fast. So
our shows always go fast when we have fantastic guests.
Yeah, they do. So next week, I know I got somebody, and I forgot to look and see who it was.
Oh. Well done.
Yeah, well, anyway, you can look. We'll have it posted this week. Who's going to?
Well, you can just tune in.
Yeah. So with that, this is Henry Foister.
Jeffrey Gould.
And Barbara Duncan.
And we will see you next week at the same time. So good night, everybody.